In this video, we go over consistency, what it means to be consistent, as well as techniques you can use to be more consistent. What's going on, Pro Guides family? It's your host, Sergeant Frost, and today we're bringing you a brand new guide on consistency. Consistency is something that a lot of players struggle with. One game you're absolutely farming people, and the next you'll be lucky to get 5 kills at halftime. Why are people inconsistent? What are the mechanisms behind it? And what can you do to be more of a consistent player? Now let's get into it. So first things first, there's 2 places where inconsistency can come from, and to target them effectively, it's important to differentiate. The first type of inconsistency is something we like to refer to as external inconsistency, or inconsistency that comes from the outside. By that, we don't mean the usual stuff like, oh, how you can be consistent in an ever-changing environment, or agents that are random, or teammates that are random, and so on and so forth. But instead, more how much is the environment punishing you for your shortcomings. If you're really bad at clearing ratty corners and you play against a full team of rats, you're bound to have a bad game. You're doing the same stuff as usual and are essentially performing at one consistent level, but the outcomes are vastly different because of the different ability of your enemies to punish your mistakes. The external inconsistency can be fixed with practice targeting your specific weaknesses. If you practice your angle clearing, you won't be losing as much as against the types of players who love sitting in corners. But angle clearing is of course just an example, and there's a lot of potential weaknesses you can have, each of which can be abused. Because of that fact, inconsistency, at least the external type, is also going to be dependent on your own skill level. If you have a very well-rounded skill set with no big weaknesses to abuse, you'll be extremely consistent, and the type of playstyle your opponents have won't have much of an effect on you. So in a way, as you get better at the game, you'll also be more consistent. Because of that, this is a type of inconsistency associated with those that are less experienced players, and something that kind of just goes as you put more and more time into the game. But there's also another part of consistency, a part that's a lot more interesting, and also the type that a lot of people tend to think of when they talk about inconsistency, and that's internal inconsistency. One day you're hitting every shot, and you are performing at a level that you yourself didn't even know you had. And the next day, or for some maybe even the next game, you can't seem to even hit a solo while he's droning. You're putting yourself in the right spot and you're setting yourself up for easy shots, but then you just miss everything. Or maybe you have a couple of pretty bad rounds at the start of a game, and then you proceed to force engagements you know aren't the best, just because you feel like getting that one kill that will turn around the game for you. For this type of consistency, there's a concept called the ABC game, which revolves around quantifying your range of performance and looking into how and why for each segment of the range. The idea first came to my attention through the DDK pod test with Elige, one of the best Counter-Strike pros in CS history. Link for that will be down below. But it's a really interesting concept. When you're playing at your absolute best, you're in the zone, hitting shots, and you're making all-around good decisions. This is what we'll refer to as your A game. It serves as the upper part of your skill range. If we then go down a bit and you're at, let's say, your average or regular skill level, the level that you're at during most days, we'll call that your B game. And then if you're at your worst, where you can't seem to hit shots and you're constantly making mistakes that you know are bad in retrospect, then that's your C game, your worst possible performance essentially. It's important to note as well that just because you're playing at your worst, your C game at the start doesn't necessarily mean that you'll always be playing your C game, halfway or at the end. Things can happen mid-game that can either set you off and make you play worse, or maybe you get a lucky clutch and you start playing significantly better afterwards. Whether you're in your A, B, or C game is largely mental, and things both in and outside of the game can have a big impact on it. Now, before we dive deeper into that and how you can use it to become a more consistent player, I should quickly mention that we also have a website. Over on ProGuides.com, we offer guides made by professional players, we have pro boot camps, and even coaching from Immortal and Radiant level coaches. For just $8 a month now, you can get access to everything, so try it out today. Now, on to how to actually use the concept of your A, B, and C game in practice. Differentiating between these different states is important. If you find yourself always being in your C game when you go into ranked without warm-up, you know it's important for you to take some time to get mentally ready. If you know that if you're stressed from homework, deadlines, or other stuff you play your C game, you know you should deal with those issues first. Some of the best players like Elige like to write all these things down and take both mental and physical notes to journal their emotions and performance. If you know things like deadlines, lack of sleep, or stress affect you, you can take the steps to avoid them and you'll see that your C game becomes less common. But be extensive with this, don't just stop at things like sleep or warm-up. Consider other factors as well. Some factors like, did I recently eat, and how much does that affect my performance? Was it a big meal? Was it a really small meal? Am I feeling really energized? Am I relaxed, sad, or maybe quite happy? Did I just go to the gym before? Did I take a walk? Or did I go to get some fresh air? Depending on the type of person you are, all these things can negatively affect or positively affect you. For me personally, a big one is food. If I just had a big meal per se, I'll always feel a bit drowsy, which makes me play worse. But also on the contrary, if I'm super hungry, my mouse control feels off, and then I begin to lose focus quickly. Maybe you guys have something similar. If so, make sure to comment down below, since for me, taking that into account really helps me with my consistency. There's more to it than just fixing things that'll make you play worse. Another big part of the ABC game is recognizing where you are mid-game and changing your behavior from there. If you're having a C game, it can be extremely helpful to try and take a step back, and then take a breath and accept that you're in your C game. Relax and look to go do things you're most comfortable with. Expanding on what you normally do and trying new things is a huge part of learning. But if you're having a C game, it's best to stay away from that, and instead only do things that you've done hundreds of times before. If you've been playing for a while, you probably have one or a couple of plays or protocols that you like to run on each map. When you're having a C game, that's really great because it allows for you to fall back on them. You've done the same play countless times, so you'll be comfortable, and therefore you'll have a much better chance of working it out as well. Sometimes just being in this comfort of familiarity and having it work out a couple of rounds can already be enough to elevate you out of your C game. But even when it isn't, you at the very least will be performing at a higher level than if you were to completely give into your emotions in autopilot. A lot of people worsen their C game themselves. You play bad and get little kills, get fixated on that low figure, and then try to force a kill and put yourself in a place that you know is bad, and ultimately fail to get a kill because of that fact, meaning you're only increasing your frustration and problems in the end. And in this case, it's also important to see that the problem isn't that you don't know how to play. If you were in your A game or even your B game, you wouldn't have made that play. You understand that maybe your peak was bad and you know why it's bad, and that you shouldn't do it, but yet you did it anyway. So then the solution is not, oh, now I know that it's bad, but more, how come I do something that I know is bad? What emotions led me to do that? Targeting your decision-making framework won't help, but seeing what you can do about that emotion will. Similarly, when you're playing your A game, the same stuff applies. You should try to observe your own emotion and emotional state. Are you calm, cool, and collected? Are you a bit hyped? How are you feeling? What's the type of energy you have to be in your A game? If there's things you can replicate to increase the likeliness of performing at your top level, you should strive to reproduce that. Maybe it's a good night's sleep. Maybe it's the quiet lo-fi music in the background. Maybe it's that you just got back from the gym and are lifting some weights. But then it's also important to observe how you leave your A game if this occurs. I often find myself performing at my best level, but then quickly get spooked and start dropping off. Partly this can be because of my own insecurities. If I'm playing my best, I want to keep playing my best, and I get scared since I don't want to fall down from that level, which ultimately makes me fall off in the end as a result. But there's also an element where I know I'm playing well and I'm not necessarily getting overconfident, but more so scared of losing. I feel like in order to win, I need to maintain my current momentum and keep getting 2 to 3 kills per round, ultimately dropping myself to a C game instantaneously where I'm constantly making poor decisions that I just know aren't good, just because I want to force those kills. Recognizing these emotions or feelings that are causing these mistakes means you'll have a much better idea of what to target. It's not your understanding of the game, but maybe rather your greediness for kills when you're having a bad game. Even if you don't know how to deal with the emotion, just being aware of what you might feel and how that changes your behavior in-game can already have a positive effect on your gameplay. For me, I know that I have a tendency to overthink, which makes me sometimes be unconfident in a peak, because then I start second-guessing myself just a second before I execute it. And since I started focusing more on my mental game and became more and more aware of that, it has helped me to quickly recognize that emotion in the moment, so that I can stop for a second and delay my action until I give myself some time to get mentally prepared. Of course, these emotions are highly personal. Maybe you can't relate to overthinking in a game at all, but you have a tendency to tilt and lose control, or something entirely different. That's fine, it's all about journaling and becoming aware of your own mental game, and seeing what requires work for you. So just to recap, there's 2 types of inconsistencies in Valorant, the external type, or the differing ability of your opponents to punish your weaknesses. This type becomes less and less of an issue as you become more rounded and an all-around more higher skilled player. And then there's internal inconsistency, the range in which your personal performance varies. This range can be divided into the A, B, and C game. A game represents the highest levels of performance across that range, and C game's the lowest part. It's important to take notes observing your emotional state, linked to your performance. If you find you play best with soft music in the background after a good night's sleep and a good but not too filling lunch, then try to get yourself these circumstances as often as possible. If you find that you play worse, you start tilting, going for stupid plays and bad peaks out of greediness, then try to be aware of that emotion. Accept it when you're playing worse and go back to things that you're comfortable with and very used to doing. Know that just because you had a few rough rounds and are doing as well as you had hoped doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be playing at the same level by the end of it. Don't lose your mind or try to force things and you'll get a much better result. Emotions are an important aspect of your gameplay. Recognize that and do your best to not let them take over. Well guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you now have a better idea of what kind of factors go into performance and how you can be a more consistent player. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more like this. This has been your host Sergeant Frost, and good luck on the grind in the new episode.